Good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of Fact Sheet live on ETV, live on NISIM 95.9 and 100.1, also live on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Our handle is ETV Ghana, and you can follow the conversation and share your thoughts with us. Tonight on Fact Sheet, we're talking about utility tariffs going up. If you check per the statement which came from the PURC after weeks and weeks of waiting for the official announcement of how much we're going to pay for the utilities we consume, be it electricity and water, the PURC came out with a statement and they told us that ECG is going to have an upward adjustment by some 27.15% and Ghana Water by some 21.55%. Now, if viewers and listeners can recollect, Ghana Water Company Limited was looking for over 300% increase in tariffs, and the ECG, Netco and Co were also looking for over 100% increment in terms of the utility tariffs. This got many talking as to how the PURC was going to arrive at a position that was going to, give some relief to Ghanaians, especially seeing how the economy is performing and the hardships and the value of the money we hold in our hands. And finally, they did make that announcement as to how Ghanaians are receiving that. We'll find out tonight on the show. And what went into the determination of these tariff adjustments for the Ghana Water Company Limited and the ECG, would have an appreciation of these matters. Now, the issue which has always popped up in the conversation about these tariff adjustments has been the capacity of these entities to serve Ghanaians well, be it water or electricity. The ECG and Ghana Water Company Limited over the years have been making the case that it is about time Ghanaians paid for what they consume so that they can serve them better. They talk about how they need to replace equipment. They talk about how they need to expand. They talk about the need for installation of modern equipment to better serve Ghanaians. And so over the years where these companies have looked through their books and have been asking for a certain percentage from the PURC, and the PURC slashing down to sometimes maybe some very low figure. How do we expect these utility entities to survive and also to provide the services we are looking for? And so tonight we'll try to understand the issues that went into the determination of these utility tariffs. We'll also ask you, as a viewer of the show, what was your reaction to the 27 and 21% increment by the PURC for both water and electricity? That's our conversation tonight on Fact Sheet. I encourage you to let your thoughts be heard live tonight, even as we brood over these matters. I'll be joined by my guest after this short commercial break. Do kindly stay with us. You're welcome back to Fact Sheets live on ETV, live on NISIM 95.9 and 100.1. Tonight on Fact Sheet, we're talking about utility tariffs and the adjustment by some 27% and some 21% for ECG and Ghana Water Company Limited. We're joined via Zoom tonight by Mr. Mark Bedu Abwaje, who is CEO, Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industries, Dr. Eric Obute, who is Director of Research and Corporate Affairs for PURC, and Faith Moses, who is a research analyst with IES. Gentlemen, good evening, and thanks so much for joining us.
Good evening.
All right, so I would like to start with you, Mr. Obute, if you can shed more light as to what went into the decision to arrive at these percentages. That's for ECG 27.15% and for Ghana Water Company Limited 21.55%.
Yeah, thank you very much, and a very good evening to your viewers as well. The Commission looked at the operational expenses of the utilities as well as the capital expenses of the utilities. Operational expenses was fully granted to the utilities just to make sure that they are able to run. Operational expenses including the HR, maintenance, lubricants, fuel. So that was fully granted to the utilities. The capital expenses, the Commission had to take a different route by looking at grants, the expenses that have been funded by grants, investment that has been funded by government funding, and also investment that is funded through the internally generated funds. So all of that was considered to arrive at the figures that we came up with yesterday for the public.
Now, over the years that these figures have been thrown by either the ECG, by NETCO, or by Ghana Water Company Limited, they have always have tenable reasons, good reasons for which they demand for these things. One of the key issues has to do with, expansion, has to do with the replacement of their worn-out, machinery that they use to, serve Ghanaians. You don't find these reasons they give for these increments they seek, as reasonable enough?
Yes, we do. We do find them as reasonable enough. But at the same time, we also need to make sure that we vet all the investments that have been brought before the commission. We cannot just pass through all the costs that they've given to us. We need to vet the costs and be sure that the cost that we pass through is both prudent and efficient cost. We cannot pass on inefficiencies to the consumers.
So from 300%
so we need to vet all the costs before we come up to
21.55% for Ghana Water Company Limited. You don't think that is too harsh a slash?
Well, earlier on I said to you that we are looking at the grants, government funding, and internally generated funds for the CAPEX. For the OPEX, everything was granted. For the CAPEX, we look at grants. If you are going to receive grants, you don't need to pass it through the tariff. Obviously, that will not influence the tariff, so that one will bring the tariff down. Government funding in the sense that government says it's giving them some loans. They call them on-lend loans. And after the loans have been given to them, they are supposed to pay back government with interest. And government says those loans that have advanced to you, keep them under the circumstances. We know that times are hard for everybody. So use that to cushion the tariff. So we take that one out, we strip that one out because you're not going to pay back government. So we strip it out. Now, at the same time, government is a sole shareholder of the utilities, the public utilities, ECG, Ghana Water Company, VRA. Government is a sole shareholder of those companies. Now, they are supposed to pay return on equity to government. And government says, those return on equity that you pay to me, for now, under the current circumstances, shelve it. Don't pay that to me. Use that to cushion the tariffs. The last but not the least of them all is that when the proposals were brought to the commission, the proposals were based on 2022 to 2027. That's a 5-year tariff window. Now we are doing a 3-year tariff window, which is 2022 to 2025. So obviously the last 2 years, the investments which we're supposed to do in 2026 and 2027 have been hived off as well. So that obviously will not influence the tariff. So with all these components put together, it brought the tariff down to this level.
Now, how did these utility providers receive the news of your figures that you put out? Did they receive it kindly or they did not, as you had engagement with them?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, they've not complained about the tariffs as we have them now. What they have said is that they will do their very best to make sure that they up their game and make sure they provide the quality services that we all need. They understand the times that we are in. They know that these are not normal times. Times are difficult for everybody. Times are difficult for the utilities. Times are difficult for the ordinary Ghanaian as well. So as much as we can to cushion the ordinary Ghanaian and to cushion the utilities, they understand that. They understand that if you grant them the OPEX, at least OPEX will keep them afloat to make sure that they at least keep the lights on and keeps the taps running. So to the best of my knowledge, they've not come back with any discussions refuting the tariff or maybe suggesting that they were not happy with the tariffs that we've granted them. I mean, in all of these things, the tariffs will be corrected through what we call a quarterly tariff adjustment over the period. And that will be done on a quarterly basis. So whatever it is that has not been done now will be corrected over the 3-year period through adjusting the tariff on a quarterly basis.
Now, let's play with some figures tonight. Are you able to tell us these grants that you speak of, that you believe can support these agencies, are you able to tell us how much they amount to?
No, I'm unable to tell you that one.
How about government, loans that is advanced to these entities as well?
So those government loans they are quite huge. For the Ghana Water, for instance, is the region of, I think, about 600 million. And the ECG it's quite a number. I cannot readily give you the figures off the top of my head, but it's quite a huge sum of money.
Now, it's interesting that, for instance, Ghana Water that you mentioned is being advanced some 600 million per the figure you have given me. And yet, anytime I've spoken to the PRO, the communications director for the Ghana Water Company Limited, he has always indicated how much it costs them to produce water and how cheap it is they are selling to Ghanaians and the losses they make every day, especially looking at the the desalination plants and the burden that's on their shoulders. Did you factor all these issues in your considerations?
Yes, we did. We factored all of those issues into the consideration. The capital expenditure, we took all the aging assets, we factored in critical investments that we needed to make sure that the company works and works efficiently. So all other investments that they could not justify why it should be put through the tariff, the commission had to shelve those ones for now and do a further analysis on them. But the ones which are very critical, getting transformers, pumps, pipelines, replacing old lines, those ones that will make justifications for meters, the commission passed those ones through the tariff. So those ones, yes, they have made a case for it and the commission has passed them through. But the ones that they've not been able to make a serious case for, the commission has not been able to pass them through.
Now, I am looking at a headline story that suggests the same government that is saying that it's going to advance some loans to, ECG. The same government that says that being the majority stake controller in these entities and as such, whatever profits or whatever they are supposed to advance to government, they should hold on to. Ghana Water already is telling you it doesn't make profits. It doesn't even break even in the first place. So really, they are in a very tight situation. And yet, their 300% increment, they have only gotten 21. Now, I am looking at the story, and correct me if I'm wrong, which is attributed to, for instance, ECG, where we are told that some state institutions, their indebtedness alone to ECG is mind-blowing. So, if the government has the money to pay ECG these loans, how come that these agencies and institutions that operate for government are indebted to ECG, for example?
Well, ECG itself, through whatever I know, ECG itself claims that government has paid down its indebtedness to ECG. So I don't really know where these figures are coming from, and I don't know how mind-blowing the figures are. But ECG has accepted that government has been paying down on its indebtedness to the company.
And in the process of arriving at these figures, did you query to indeed find out whether these figures have been paid them or it's not your duty?
No, we did query. And what we found out was that, yes, indeed, government has been paying down on the indebtedness that they owe the utilities.
Give us a sense of the indebtedness of government to ECG.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, government owed ECG at a point, I think it's about 40 million, but they've been able to pay down on those debts considerably. As of now, I don't really, because they have a clearing house in which they clear. So if ECG owes VRA or VRA owes Ghana Water, they have a way by which they clear the debts that they owe each other. And what they are doing now, the ECG is putting in place prepaid meters to make sure that they meter all the government institutions, the MDAs, to make sure that they all pay up on their bills. So that's what they are doing now. So at least to the best of my knowledge, the government is paying down on its indebtedness to these utility companies.
Your decision is hinged partly on grants that are going to be given to these entities to operate. Now, at some point in time, with the way the world is suffering, we all know the impact of the COVID-19, the impact of the Ukraine-Russia war. At some point in time, if these grants slow down in their release or disbursement to these entities, and as you have taken a decision based on these grants, what happens to the productivity of these entities?
Well, as I said earlier on, you see, you cannot recoup all your investments through the tariff. So there must be a way out that you can recoup your investments. But these tariffs, as I said earlier on, also be corrected on a quarterly basis throughout the period of the 3 years tariff control period. It will be corrected over the 3-year period. So When that time comes and we know, and they make a cogent case that, look, we have these issues on hand and they have been able to support it with evidence, why not? The utility, the PURC will take a hard look at the figures and then make the needful or necessary adjustments to the tariff.
All right, I will come back to you with a few more questions on the determination of these figures, but let me quickly switch to Mr. Abuaje and pick his thoughts as to how, as industry players, they receive the news of these adjustments. Sir, good evening once again, and thanks for joining us. How did you receive the news of these adjustments by the PURC, upward adjustments?
Let me say, for us, it was a bad news for us. We as industry and the businesses, we are not against increment in utility tariffs because water and electricity are key components or inputs in whatever activity that you perform. So, and we also know that there are also businesses that must survive and then sustain over medium to long term. So we are not against the increment per se. Our concern for us is about the timing and also the rate at this time. We are all aware of what is going on in the economy. And let me give you a sense of how businesses already before the increment are feeling or what they are going through. And that will happen if you understand the economic environment. Every business requires three things to survive and to grow. One is the economic environment, two is the regulatory environment, and three is the micro level, the efficiency of the businesses. Now, if you are very efficient, no matter how efficient you are, the economic environment is harsh. There's no way you survive. And at the moment, it's really harsh. Why am I saying so? And I'm going to give you some figures for you to understand. Inflation is very key. At the moment, it's 31.7%, the highest for the past 20 years. And anytime inflation goes up, it also feeds into the producer price index, which gives an average of the cost of production for a typical business. At the moment, it's 38%. That is the producer price index. And then we also come back to factors like depreciation. Our economy is an open economy, and the structure is such that we import almost everything. In fact, even those that are manufacturing, they import their raw materials to manufacture. We have seen a depreciation of 30% of the cedi since the beginning of the year. So if you have 6.5% at the beginning of the year, as I speak to you, some are buying it at 10 cedis. Massive depreciation. It means that even if you're a business, without even performing any activity, you've seen a depletion of your capital to that margin. Fuel is also on the ascendancy. Food and other things on the ascendancy. And of course, labor force is asking for more because the economic environment requires that at least they also be compensated for what is happening. So before the utility, the tariffs adjustment came in, this was the situation. Now, for a typical business, 30% of the cost is on utility, also electricity. So if you are producing, 30% of your cost is on electricity and probably a bit of water. Electricity is quite high as compared to water. Now, with the 27.15%, it means that 30% is going to increase automatically, and that of water will increase. So the situation is being compounded by the increment at this time. And of course, businesses already are suffering, as I said earlier. I mean, the analysis we did for the first half of the year clearly indicates that businesses, either they are breaking even or they are running at a loss because of the situation. Only few, just about 1% are making profit as at that time. Interest rates are high. So for us, the timing is what is of concern to us. And the rate as well. I mean, 27.15 and 21, even though from all that we know and from Mr. Ogute's analysis, the electricity asks for over 144 and a water over 300%. But that one, we really thought that it wasn't going to happen because it was on the higher side, and we have had engagement with PURC and other things. So our concern now is that the timing is wrong and the rate is high. We were actually expecting that, looking at some of the measures that have been put in place by the management of the economy, we are expecting the proposed syndicated loan by September. We are expecting that there have been discussions with the IMF and at least 3 billion money will come in. That will stabilize the foreign exchange market. Of course, will bring inflation and other things down. But the next first quarter of 2023, I think will be some way, somehow we leave a bit. And if they are coming in with an increment, then it will be quite okay. I mean, when they increased it by 17.6% in 2019, we didn't cry that much because the other variables in terms of inflation, exchange rates, and fuel prices were quite okay. But at the moment, it's harsh. And as businesses, we are operating to make profits and also create value for our shareholders. We can't continuously run at a loss. So what will happen is that if we are not able to contain the losses, then businesses will have to shut down. And when they do, it means that people will be laid off, and we're going to compound an already high unemployment situation that we have in the economy. And this is real because we've had some of our members even laying off people out of the depreciation and also the inflation, the current economic environment. So we are going to see an upward adjustment in the cost of production that is going to have very significant effects on our operation. And we want to resolve inflation. Inflation is a component of a number of factors. One key factor of inflation is, of course, utility prices and water. But there is also the pass-through effect that will come from increments in prices for businesses. Businesses are likely to push these prices to consumers. The difficulty is that we may not be able to push all these increments into consumers because we are also very sensitive to what is happening to consumers. You may want to keep some of your customers. You may also want to keep your business. So you would want to at least manage the situation, but how long can businesses continue to do that? So it's a very difficult situation. And I don't know what Mr. Obite and his team can do. Probably we have to call on them and also call on government that whatever it is, we appreciate what they have done. At least, had it not been the interventions by government, would have probably been around the 100%. But we are pleading that at least they should, if possible, go down and cushion us. And we'll be ready to pay when things are okay in the first quarter of 2030.
So, Mr. Obute and the team are listening to you. What figures would have been workable for you as industry players?
Well, our initial submission was below 10%. For now, just to cushion us, we were actually looking at the operational expenses actually because those ones are expenses that you cannot do away with at this time because you need to pay your salary, you need to buy materials and other things. Those ones are legitimate for now. But for the capex matters, we will expect that they supply us electricity continuously and consistently. At least businesses for now are not investing in a lot of capital expenditure. I must be frank with you. Most business, what they are investing on just materials just to keep them surviving. This is not a time for any business to say that I'm going to buy a car or I'm going to build a factory or I'm going to build a house. Because you don't have the money, one, and if you go for loans from the banks, you are going to pay not less than 30%. So what you need now, most businesses are doing, is a survival strategy, just to ensure that we keep the business afloat and to a time that the economy will be sustainable for businesses to also expand and invest in capital expenditure.
Now, the question that one would ask is that for businessmen, regardless of what happens, whether there is inflation, whether there is depreciation of the city, businessmen always find a way of offloading that burden on the ordinary consumer. And so, if utility is adjusted upwards and then water is also adjusted upwards, obviously, you're going to throw that weight on the consumer who comes to purchase your product, be they imported or be they, manufactured locally. Is that not what you're going to do in the end?
No, that assertion is incorrect. There are three things that you need to look out for when you want to increase your price. One, the cost of production. And two, you need to look at your customers, the ability to buy, right? And three, that's economists say, the elasticity of demand for your products. So it's not always the case that when cost of production goes up, you pass on this entire cost to consumer. It wouldn't happen. At the moment, people are looking at how they can even pass on cost to consumer, but just 1% increase in prices, if you're not careful, will throw you out of business because the people can't even buy. And of course, if your product is highly elastic, just 1% will mean that to move you to competitors. There are ways that sometimes the cost becomes so long, so sustained over a period of time that the businesses cannot absorb them. That is when they look at ways to pass on some of these costs to consumers. So you can't say by tomorrow you're going to see a 27.15% increment in prices or 21.55%, a combination of the two, because PURC is increasing their electricity is increasing their rate, and Ghana Water is also increasing their rate. There will be some level of pass-through. You cannot contain them. We pass on to consumers, and that is for sure. That's why I spoke about the pass-through effect of this on inflation. Definitely, you're going to pass a percentage of this cost consumers, because if you want businesses to still operate, then they should be making at least breaking even to ensure that they are sustainable and resilient into the long term.
All right, let me quickly just go on the phone lines and speak to Fritz Moses, who has joined us, and pick his thoughts on this development, which has to do with the PURC's decision to give some 27.15% and 21.55% upward adjustment to these utility service providers. Fritz, good evening. Hope you're doing well. Hello, Fritz. Hello, Fritz.
Yes, hello, can you hear me? I can hear you.
Fritz, if you can hear me, could you raise your voice a bit for me? I would very much appreciate it.
Yes, I can hear you. Am I clear now?
All right, so what's been your outfit's take on the release by the PURC as to the adjustments they made in terms of the request which had been submitted by the utility service providers to them?
All right, great. Thank you once again. Of course, we welcome the development. Prior to the release, we had been calling for an increase in tariff charges, especially for ECG. We believe that for over some time now, we are not even paying a cost-reflective tariff to ensure that the utility company will be able to stay in business. And
Fritz, if you can hear me, your voice is really very low. Very, very low. If you can raise your voice for me, I hardly can hear the point you're making.
Great. Can you hear me now? Is it better?
Hello?
Yes. Can you hear me?
It's a bit okay. It's a bit okay. But anyway, let's proceed. I'll manage.
Okay. Okay. All right. So the point I was trying to make was we have been aware of the development, and prior to that, we were calling for an increment in tariffs because we believe that what we were paying only for electricity tariffs were not cost reflective, in that the utility company wasn't able to make ends meet with what we were paying. Of course, with the current increase that the PURC has agreed to or agreed for the utility company, we believe it's largely inadequate to meet the needs of the operators, the utility companies, especially in providing not only better services, but also improve services to going forward, especially in ensuring that there is a necessary investment in project development that would ensure that we have a robust and more efficient national grid. But of course, the point you make is even though the approval made by the Commission would ensure that the utility company remains in operation, it would be now the responsibility of government to ensure that we are getting other sources of revenue.
All right. Now, the point you made about your expectation of higher tariffs being the solution in terms of the profitability and productivity of these utility service providers, Mr. Obute made the point that they arrived at this decision based on a number of issues. One has to do with the fact that these institutions have been receiving grants from partner agencies and partner countries, and so it's one of the things they looked at, because these are monies that are coming into the ECG and Ghana Water for that matter. Again, they talk about government advancing loans to these entities as well. And finally, he makes the case that, look, whatever commitments that ECG or Ghana Water Company or VRA has to make to government has said that looking at the circumstance we find ourselves in, we would want for you to hold off with these commitments to us until we are out of the woods. Does this reasoning suffice for you?
Not at all. I mean, one of the reasons why we faced the electricity challenges at the beginning of last year was because we had failed to properly invest in the operations of ECG. You remember somewhere in 2017, 2018, included in the national budget were some projects that, if it had taken place over the period, we would have found ourselves in a situation we found ourselves in last year. But then, of course, the conversation that VCG and RICO then told us was that it was due to the delays in accessing funding. And so, of course, knowing that, the point that we tried to make it, if the operator itself had been able to generate some revenue through these tariffs that we believe it's entitled to, we should have been able to do away with all these projects that were sitting on the books of the Ministry of Finance, of the government, for over 3 years, and nothing was being done about this because funding was unavailable. And so, yes, even though there's always the point in accessing funds and grants outside of our internally generated means, there's not always the surety that we're going to get access to them. And so, banging our hopes or putting all our hopes on the fact that we may access funds or grants in the future it's not something that is durable, and I mean, at the end of the day, we can't really be hopeful that it would necessarily come through.
All right. Now, there was a question I asked Mr. Obute, and that has to do with government. He made the case that, for instance, some 600 million Ghana cedis had been advanced to, I believe, ECG. And I asked him that, is it the same government whose agencies and institutions owe ECG these huge amounts of money? And he says, well, these indebtedness have been settled. Do you think with a government that is waiting on a syndicated loan, a government that is waiting on the EIB loan, a government that's waiting on IMF to come into the scene to solve its economic issues, would be able to help ECG if they find themselves in any crisis?
Well, clearly, it's doubtful to say government would be interested or willing to inject that needed capital in ECG's operations, so in the Ghana Water operations. I mean, we haven't seen that effort in years past, in the past 6 years. And so it will be very doubtful that going forward, you would see that investment coming, especially when we are in the phase of tight access to credit on international markets. So for us, I mean, our point is, whereas we, in times when we were able to access credit in the past and we haven't been able to advance them to these critical activities, we should not be looking at how can we help these entities to generate enough revenue that within themselves they can undertake the capital expenditure that we need as a country to avoid any shortages or inaccessibility to the services that the very critical services that they provide for us.
All right, we will go for a short breather, and then when we come back, we would take some wrap-up comments from our guests. For Mr. Obute to also react to some of the points that Fraser has been making, and Mr. Abajitu has been making as well. And so we'll just be right back after this short breather. Welcome back to Fact Sheet Live on ETV, live on NISIM 95.9 and 100.1 live on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. We have some 10 minutes to wrap up the conversation. Let me quickly go to Mr. Obute and just ask a few questions, I believe just one or two for some clarity. So, Mr. Obute, I'm asking myself the question that with several institutions, for instance, this morning we were reading about how CHAS is threatening to close down schools as a result of government's inability to release funds to them for the running of these schools, and these are as a very prime project that's on the heart of government, and yet it's struggling. How sure are you that these loans that government speaks of, they can be advanced to the ECG for them to do their work as is expected of them, to expand and to give us the quality we're asking for, both water and then power as well? Hello, Mr. Obute. Hello?
Hello,
Yes, I can hear you, except your line is
can
a
you hear
bit
me?
draggy.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, the internet is not very stable. So I said I didn't quite get your question.
Okay, so what I was asking
posed.
was, government obviously is struggling in terms of its commitment to certain, projects and activities that it's supposed to embark on. I was giving you an example of the free SHS, for instance, where, the headmasters are threatening that they may have to shut down schools as a result of the delay in the release of funds to run these schools. So I ask, with all these concerns on the back of government, what sureties do you have that these loans that you speak of would be advanced to the ECG, Ghana Water, VRA, and Co?
Well, in the first place, I have to be careful that maybe for the case of the loans I'm talking about, the 600 million that you quoted, I was talking in terms of Ghana Water Company.
Ghana Water
But
Company.
I need to cross-check that figure. So I will not want to be quoted on that figure. As I said, 600 million has been advanced to Ghana Water Company.
Okay.
I need to cross-check that figure. I'm not too sure of the figure itself,
Okay.
but I have to cross-check on the figure. Secondly, as to whether the government has got some issues with free SHS, that is not really in the jurisdiction of the commission. The commission
I was just using
does
that
this
as an
work
example to buttress the point that
Yes.
government is in dire situation.
Well, I cannot speak for government. I can only speak for PURC. So I do not know the coffers of government. So I cannot go in there and speak for government. Maybe government has got some money seated somewhere that you can use to do this. But I can only speak for the utilities, not the utilities. I can only speak for PURC actually, and what PURC has done for the utilities. But I cannot go into the area of government and the utilities. That is something which is arranged between government and the utilities, which has been agreed between government and the utilities. And I do not want to veer off that and go and meddle in issues that maybe I have
But I would
knowledge of.
I would expect that in arriving at these figures, you would have seen some commitment on the part of the government that is promising these utility service providers these figures or these amounts. You would have seen some evidence before you worked your percentages based on that.
Well, if the shareholder tells you that he will be able to do that, we don't have to doubt it, that the shareholder said he'll do it. So if the shareholder has taken full responsibility, we just pass it through with the consent of those who, the managers of the institution. They are running the institution. And they think that, well, they believed in their shareholders. The shareholders said you do it. So the regulator takes it on board and passes it through. That's exactly what we have done.
Interesting. Let me take final comments as well from Mr. Bedu Abwaje as to any comments he may make with respect to their expectations, as much as they were expecting some 10%. What's the way forward then for industry?
The way forward, we will continuously engage governments and the PURC. I don't know how possible we're going to see if it's possible for a reduction. But given that it's not done, businesses are not Father Christmas. They need to survive. They need to create value for shareholders. So definitely there will be increases in prices. So we should expect increases in prices whenever this upper adjustment kicks in. Already we have experiencing that it's going to go up further. And those who are not able to survive or sustain themselves, and if they should go under or they should collapse, then people will be laid off as well. So, I mean, the situation is unbearable. We all did not pray for this, but it has come. That is why we are asking that at least we manage the situation together with all stakeholders like ECG and Ghana Water, to at least give us a rate that will be sustainable for now, a rate that businesses can absorb and not pass on to consumers. With that, we are also expecting that inflation will go up further, and I'm a bit doubtful whether even the end of year inflation of 28.5 that was announced at the budget review,
Budget review,
with what is going on. So I mean, it's a bad situation. The cost per kilowatt hour for electricity for Ghana, as compared to even the countries around us, is way higher. We are not actually competitive. I mean, when it comes to even the after, where one key factor that people will be looking at is how competitive you are in terms of cost. We are being outcompeted in that space as well. Because if you go to Ethiopia, electricity is way below. If you go to Kenya and our colleagues in the northern part of Africa, it's way low. And businesses need electricity, especially the manufacturing sector. They are high electricity consuming agencies. So whenever there is increment in prices, it affects virtually everything that they do. So yes, there will be increase in prices. Possibility of laying off is also there, and inflation is definitely go up.
All right. I'm grateful, Mr. Bedu Abwaje, for your final comments this morning. Fritz, if you're still on the line, I'll take your final comments before we wrap up tonight. All right. It looks like we lost Fritz on the line. So on that note, I would like to thank you for being a part of tonight's edition of Fact Sheet Live on ETV on NISM 95.9 and 100.1, and also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. From the entire production team, Kwame, Sefa, my own man who is here in the studio with me making things happen, we say we thank you. For the drivers who will be taking us home, we say thank you as well. Do have a pleasant evening from especially Amos. Good evening.